Let me announce the next panel, and Sanjeev Rangaras, ITC Agro. Sanjeev, if you can come on board. I went and met Shiv Kumarji at Hyderabad to discuss it, and he has agreed to set up this panel. We have an excellent panel. As though I am 62, there is one small kid in me, so I need to tell something about Sanjeev. He was at IIT Kanpur when I was there as the President's Students Gymkhana. I was a very mischievous guy. You're not going to ask him anything about me. Be a good fan. Don't give him a chance to complain about me.
Thanks, Arvind. I think what we'll do is I'll request my panel members to come here, and then we will commence. Can I request D, Mark, Mr. Prakash, and Mr. Surya. Could you please come? Any order would do. Good afternoon, everyone. I think Harsh has given an excellent backdrop to whatever we are going to do. He was supposed to speak after us. So as I was going through my slides, I find that he's already covered quite a bit of it. But nevertheless, it reinforces whatever we are speaking. So what I'm going to do is very simple. We have about 70 minutes planned. I have about 8-9 minutes to do the introduction. 5 minutes each panel member will speak. We have about 15 minutes for some discussion, and then we'll round it up with some audience questions. And the only part which I want to highlight at this point is, I do not know how many of you are into agri. I'm an engineer from Kanpur. I spent about 27 years in engineering. Last decade, I'm based out of Guntur. So if you see that I'm overclad, this is my Delhi roots, which is saying, once in a while, take out your suit and tie. That's why I'm dressed like this. People are asking me, why are you overdressed? In Guntur, I get very rarely an opportunity to wear this, so hence I'm wearing these clothes. So we have our agri headquarters based out of Guntur. It's a 10,000 crore company, just in case you thought it was small. No size of 5 lakh crores, what Harsh has, but that is scale. So I'm going to talk about scale as we go along. Folks, this is what keeps me awake and my team awake. 20% of the world population, 2.5% land, and about 4% water resources. This is what Harsh, myself, and several people on this table are struggling with. Can you move to this next slide, please? Okay, that's gone faster. Okay, pretty good. So I think we hear Modi talking about $5 trillion economy, etc. It's not going to happen without taking this large set of people with us. 50% of the people, or 60%, numbers keep changing, are the people who are dependent on this. And for some of us in this room, rainfall means when it rains, it's good, right? But some of us get up in the morning every day to see whether there's rainfall. There's a right time for the rainfall. This year, while people might in India say rainfall has been adequate, we believe it has been disastrous to several crops, right? So there's a very different perspective from a city to a rural or a person who works in the farms. So I think the biggest issue that we face in farming today is the uncertainties. Any aspect which you come up with, can I move to the next slide, please? It is complicated. Let me tell you, all of you run businesses. Look at the number of parameters, they're far more. I can list 100 out here where nothing is certain. Can you imagine making an investment where the final outcome is not determined by you? It's all risk prone. How many of you would even put money into an agri venture? Look at the farmer, what he does. There is issue of soil, lack of infrastructure, yield, market price. He determines nothing. He determines nothing. I think this, in India, perhaps this is one of the most risky investment that the farmer does. And there's 60% of them doing it on an ongoing basis. Next slide, please. So these are so many villages. I thought we're coming to a population, a set of people who may not be aware. So 650,000 villages, 120 million farmers, 80% small, 140 million hectares, 60% rain-fed. So many climatic zones and so many crops. I think the issues are myriad, and we're expecting this forum to perhaps address. I don't have answers. I have lots of people in this forum, outside this forum, startups, who are doing work, but all doing work at a micro scale. We need mega impact. We need scale is what Harsh does. We need scale in this area. Next slide, please. Yep. So, I was an engineer, so I said, let me put in an equation. To me, this is all that makes sense. How can I improve productivity from the same farm, get slightly more? How can I, in the productivity, improve the quality? Because the better the quality, more the price he gets. How can I reduce cost of cultivation? That's the equation which we follow as a mantra. Okay? Now, I was told by several panel members, and this is my submission, most of the views out here are personal views, does not reflect my organization. Okay? Am I right, Prakash? So I thought I'll mention that because people might see it as a view of an organization. No, these are our views. So this is what the issue before us is. So anything that we do, if we keep the farmer at the center, perhaps there will be far more output, far more what the country wants. We want to keep the farm at the center of every single activity we do. Next slide, please. So I was listing down the challenges in Indian agriculture. So like Harsh said, there are hundreds of them. So I said, can I list down 3, 4 which I feel? So the variables are so high, it's impossible to sort all of them out. Are there 3 or 4 variables which can perhaps have a big impact on the organization or on the farmer? Tell me, how many people in this room, next slide please, would choose agri as a career for your children? I attend conferences world over, and I find not even 1% of the people in the audience even opting for their children to choose this as a career. It's not good news. Obviously, it is not an attractive thing. With all those risks, how many of you would put money behind it? Next slide, please. So for me, I'm putting 4 challenges. To me, I operate out of Andhra, Karnataka, MP, UP, about 20 states I operate from. If there's one issue which I can sort out, water, perhaps it will resolve a lot of issues. Right? And 89% of the country's entire groundwater goes into agriculture, and only 50% of the agricultural land is... so let me tell you, there are 330 million hectares in India, out of which 200 million hectares is gross cropped, and only 140 million is net sown, which means only 50 million gets sown again and again. So if you go to East Godavari, West Godavari, you can get 3 paddy crops. But if you come south of Andhra, I'm just giving an example, you can have a single crop. The whole idea is if water is available, perhaps we could sow the same ground again and again. We could have multi-cropping, right? And the net irrigated area out of a total of 330 million is only 65 million hectares. The rest of the land is rain-fed, which means every morning you get up and see and hope that there's going to be rain. 5 years, out of the last 5 years, 4 years we've gone through drought. I don't think you people can even imagine what some of the farmers have gone through. There are suicides, people are on the brink of debt. So these are issues. So water for me always comes first. If National Highway Authority could sort out something, I believe that National Irrigation Authority under the Jal Ministry could perhaps resolve a lot of issues. Labor shortage, unusual. Most of the crops where there is intensive labor use, we don't find labor. So, sir, I'm looking at, Harsh, is we are creating a product where we would be able to aggregate labor and perhaps utilize labor more effectively. We're looking at that app. High wastage, I think you people have heard of this, but to me, this constitutes one of the key components in Indian agriculture. If you can resolve through cold chains, etc., I think you people from the IoT world could perhaps give us some solution out here. The fact is that when there is a harvest, there's a harvest. So we need to preserve the stuff till the time it reaches the market. So there is an arbitrage of between 5 to 80 rupees. What the farmer gets is 5 rupees, what you buy in the market is 80 rupees. 75 rupees goes to multiple people in the value chain. Challenge 4 is pesticide residues. We export a lot of stuff. There is indiscriminate use. So we suffer a lot of rejection on account of pesticide residues. Just 2% of the world's export, agri-trade is from India. That's 2%, which is insignificant. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah. So the question is, how do we address these challenges in the Indian context? Can we draw some inspiration from some other countries? I know we talk about Israel, so I chose 2 examples which are different. So I chose Netherlands, second largest agri exporter. Can you imagine this country exports? I think for the IoT experts, this must be a complete lab for you. Anything possible is happening in this country. You have to visit this country to see what they're doing. Miracle is the word. And the second is China. Drones are luring young Chinese back to the countryside. You talked about creating employment. This is creating. Drone pilots is the latest buzzword in China. Okay? So with this, moving to the next slide. So there are a lot of digital farming trends. I do not know what is ready, what we need to do, but we need to pick out a few and make them a success. Next click, please. No, okay, right. So this is what I had to say. This is my introduction. I don't have any answers. I think my panel members have a lot to say. So the panel today is Mr. Doraiswamy Narayan. He's the CEO of Bayer India and Monsanto. Right? Mark Kahan, Varun Prakash, and Mr. Surya Kumar. But I must introduce them properly. Okay, next slide. So this is Mr. Narayan, right? He's a chartered accountant. He worked for ITC for 10 years. He was in Monsanto, US, now the head of Bayer out here, runs several initiatives. Perhaps knows a lot more farming than people who've been in agri. He will talk about it. Let's go to Mark. Mark is a prolific investor. He would give perspectives on which agri firms is he investing in, why is he investing in it, and he will give us some perspective on the IoT side, which part of his portfolio is devoted to. Next is Varun Prakash. Varun Prakash is from McKinsey. He is an IoT expert there, has done IoT not necessarily in the agri, but in other areas. Perhaps some learning from him as to how we can implement it in agriculture. Moving into Surya. Surya, of course, is the Chief General Manager for NABARD, Karnataka. His track record in agri is better than most of us. So let's hear a few things from him, what he thinks ails some part of India. He's been to quite a few states and would give a perspective which is perhaps more comprehensive about all India. So let's discuss. So over to Narayan.
Thanks, Sanjeev. Good afternoon, everybody. Delighted to be part of this discussion. Let me start by saying I've, as Sanjeev said, have the opportunity to work with ITC. I was actually the first employee of ITC Agribusiness much before you joined, and spent 10, 12 years there, and then the last 20 years with Monsanto and now Bayer. Worked pretty much all over the world, and so I'm really glad to be back in India, especially at a time, I would say, when I genuinely believe it's a glass half full, half empty. We are at the cusp of a huge opportunity, and a lot of what we can do will be driven by technology and a lot of what you people are working here today. Let me say a few words about Bayer. Bayer is a global life science company. The biggest business we have is crop science, which is agriculture. And the second business vertical, we have healthcare, which we run it with pharmaceuticals and consumer health. It's a company which is more than 165, 170 years old, from Germany. But the bedrock of the company is innovation, and that's what we are proud of what we do even today. Bayer in India has been for more than 125 years. And again, as we look at it, our biggest business in India is crop science or agriculture. And especially with the combination with Monsanto, we count more than 50 to 20 million farmers as our customers in India today and are proud to be part of the whole farming ecosystem. Clearly, our drivers for the future obviously will be innovation, which is the core, but then a big part of it will be digital, and we'll talk about it and how it is transforming all segments of the value chain. And finally, sustainability. And I think the chairman of NABARD talked quite a lot about sustainability and the challenges of water and all the other natural resources that we have. So clearly, we believe we have a huge opportunity to work together to transform. In India today, as we look at it and into the future, obviously there are a lot of challenges. And Sanjeev, you talked quite about it as well. But the question what we ask ourselves is, what can we do and how do we go about it? But before I do that, I'll just talk with one example on how the Internet of Things has transformed the company we are today. It all started with R&D nearly 7, 8, 10 years ago, when if you think of the world of breeding, which is where you get the best of the seeds that come in for the farmers, that whole space in the last 10 years has transformed so much that what would take a typical 5 to 7 year cycle, and we would plant crops for trials in more than 2 million to 3 million hectares all over the world, today has transformed to a precision agriculture mainly driven by data, insights, real-time information, drones, and all of the technologies that have come together, and has reduced the cycle time of innovation significantly. That's one real example you can think of, because this whole piece of IoT, we are going to touch every bit of the value chain, and it needs to work together for this to be successful. And the benefit of this is truly global for a company like us, where when we look at our breeding programs, we have got parental lines which we breed with moving from all over the world because we have visibility. It is one global program. And then the third aspect, and this is the most critical piece that I'm excited as a company, we believe the future is value chains coming together. And we started a value chain concept called Better Life Farming, where we said, if you keep farmer at the center, you need to make sure he has to earn sustainable farm income. Without sustainable farm income, none of us have a business to work with. So how do you ensure it? And then the second piece is, how do you drive sustainable agriculture with it? So we started testing models where we created a partnership with Bayer at the center, because we have the seeds, we have crop protection, and then agronomy knowledge, which is the core of our business. We have a partner, NetFM, for water management, Yara Fertilizer for nutrients, and then we said, all that is good, but we also need to have off-takers, companies like ITC, who can support price discovery and off-take. We've been testing this model for the last 2-3 years, and IFC has been working with us to test whether this model works. And we started with a small scale, and most recently we finished with nearly 10 to 15,000 farmers. We've been able to prove that farm income can double and triple. But there's still challenges with respect to risk management, financing, and all the other aspects of the value chain which needs to be worked on. But I'll leave you with the point, as you think about innovation, it is value chain like this, and how can all of you are working on this connect with these value chains to scale up? Because this is where we believe is the future, because at the end of the day, to reach millions of farmers directly is going to be difficult. It has to be with digital technologies. It has to be with FPOs like the chairman of NABARD talked about, and how do we work collectively to come together? So anyway, I'm going to stop there. Excited to be here. A lot of opportunities. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Narayan. No, this is fine. This is fine. If you can go on to the next page, please. So maybe I'll start off with a little bit on the trends and opportunities that I see in the agriculture space, and then let's talk about technology in the context of these trends and opportunities, right? So the first thing, in India, we're going to see increasing demand for food. Between 2015 and 2025, you're going to see a 40% increase in the demand for food, which results in a 70% increase in the agricultural GDP opportunity for farmers. So this is a fantastic space to be in. I think that's number one. Second, there is a real opportunity to improve productivity in this space. At this point, if you look at our productivity for hectare for rice, for instance, we're at around 55% of where China is at. So all of you, with the kinds of technologies and ideas that you're working with, are in a space dealing with an important opportunity for India. I think the third, in terms of the types of opportunity, the nature of consumption is changing as well. In terms of the incremental produce that you'll see over the next 5 to 10 years, 2/3 of it will come from fruits and vegetables and proteins, pulses, not from the staple rice and wheat. So the nature of consumption is changing. And therefore, the types of opportunities, whether you're talking about cold chain logistics, et cetera, is related to that as well. So that was the third thing. The fourth, and Sanjeev spoke about this at length, there's a lot of stress in the system with respect to land, labor shortage, et cetera. So it's a problem that we'll need to address as we think about how to set up the agricultural sector for the future. We spoke about food wastage, so I don't want to repeat the point. The last is, as we think about the role of technology and IoT in particular, there's increasing innovation in this space, and people are going directly to the farmer, not just to big companies, not just to the middlemen, but directly to the farmer, whether you're talking about weather technologies like SkyMet, whether you're talking about platforms that integrate all the mandis, connecting farmers to consumers. There's an increasing amount of focus directly to the farmers, and that's a good thing as well. Right? So that sets the context a little bit on where we are and what I see at least as the trend shaping the agriculture space and the role of technology in this. So with that out of the way, in terms of where the technology opportunity is going to come from, there are three broad areas that we are looking at. Right? Number one is aerial technologies, drones, UAVs, etc. I'm sure a lot of you are working in this space. This is becoming increasingly mature, and other sectors are using this at scale. So this is the first area that we think is that I think is fairly attractive. The second is automation, semi-automation, sensorization of farm equipment, whether we're talking about tractors, irrigation, fertilization equipment, etc. And the third part of it is, once you get out of the farm and go towards processing facilities, the role of IoT in improving yield throughput in manufacturing plants. So I'll speak a little bit on the first two areas, and there are people who can speak at length on the third area as well. So maybe if we can start off with drones and UAVs, right? If we can skip to the next page. So drones and UAVs. So ultimately, this is, you want to monitor and locate what's happening in the farm better, and it allows you to do many different things, right? Number one, it allows you to predict crop growth. So what that means is you can figure out what's going to happen to food prices and what's going to happen to farmers' incomes. So just as an example, Descartes Labs in the US can predict corn production with a margin of error of 1% or so. So that gives you a tremendous opportunity to figure out what's happening or what's going to happen in the coming year, right? Similarly, spectral imaging allows you to figure out what's happening in the field to aid decision making. Do you have crops that are affected by diseases? Are there spaces that are dry where I need to increase the amount of irrigation input, et cetera, right? So this is an exciting technology that in a low-cost, relatively low-cost way will allow you to improve productivity in the farms. And it was interesting that you spoke about how people are positioning it as drone pilots, which makes it attractive for people to get into this space as well. So that's the first type of technology. The second is, if we think about farm equipment, right? The way farm equipment will function is changing, and it's changing rapidly in other parts of the world. So if you go into a tractor in some parts of the world, like a John Deere tractor, the amount of input and assistance a farmer receives is increasing exponentially. So GPS that tells you whether you're going in a straight line, whether there are spots that you've missed, whether you need to redo a specific spot. So your productivity improves because the number of back and forth trips you make goes down. Your fuel consumption, input into the process improves because you're more efficient in the way that that you run your tractor. So the question really is, are Indian farmers ready for adopting technology like this, right? And I have two thoughts there. Number one is that I do believe that with the right set of incentives and inputs, farmers will adopt it. And I say this because I work in other sectors where the demographic of the target audience is quite similar. So in the construction space, for instance, the people who lay roads, they do a process called grading. And motor graders have very similar technologies to tractors. It allows you inputs on how you're grading. There is the possibility of autonomous grading, etc., right? And the workers in that sector are starting to adopt these technologies. So with the right incentives and training and coaching, the demographic or the target audience is able to adopt all of these technologies. So I'm very bullish about the ability to roll this out at scale. Maybe the last bits, if I can speak about, right? Sensors. So if we take fertilizers as an example, and there was an interesting point on how we're unable to sell chilies because the amount of pesticides or fertilizers are too high. Now, there are companies that allow you to figure out where the weeds are in your farm so that you can target your fertilizer input on those specific parts of the field. So the crop is unaffected, and it allows you to increase your yield because you're targeting specific areas that need to get that need to get addressed, right? So in the US, for instance, if you talk about lettuce, 5% of the lettuce uses this kind of technology, and the yields are increasing on the back of this. So for us, as a country that is a huge user of fertilizers, to both reduce input costs and to make our products more safe for consumption, these sort of innovations coming into the marketplace is fantastic, right? So maybe we can skip over this. We've been through multiple examples of technology, and I want to ensure that all of us can listen to the other participants as well. So if I can just take a step back. Exciting space, technology is ready. We need to figure out how to convince the end users and come up with innovative models like agricultural services to provide them with the incentive to use it.
Can we go to the first slide? Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. Speaking after such esteemed panelists and after Bhanwalaji is always a hard act to follow, but I'm going to try to do my best. I've been in this ecosystem for a long time. Actually, I share something in common with two of the gentlemen on this panel, in that all three of us worked for ITC at different times in our careers. My first work that I ever did in India was as an intern while I was getting my MBA at ITC. And so I have a deep fondness for the agribusiness division there and the work that they've built over the years. After ITC, I joined Syngenta, was there for some time, and then moved to India in 2007 with Godrej Agrovet, and was at Agrovet for about 6-7 years. And it was during my time in Agrovet that we launched Omnivore as the first AgriTech-focused venture fund in India. And so we've seen this ecosystem from its very earliest days. And so the purpose of what I want to talk about here today is not to talk about what could be and not to talk about what should be, but to talk a little bit about what's actually happening in this ecosystem, what's getting funded, what success we're seeing, and we're talking about things in India as opposed to what might be happening in China or Silicon Valley or wherever. So this slide is actually quite a powerful slide, because the story it tells you is this. When I started Omnivore in 2011-12, and I think at that time maybe 13 million in USD was the funding into AgriTech. Last year we crossed 200 million, and this year we crossed as of the halfway mark, as of the end of September, we crossed 225 million. So the amount of venture money that is flowing into AgriTech is much, more than 10x what it used to be. So anyone who says, oh, there's no funding in this space, that was true. It's no longer true. It's still difficult. It's still a fraction of the aggregate funding in the venture ecosystem, but there are interested investors in a way that there weren't when we started this journey. Next slide. When we define AgriTech, we think of it as very much farm to fork, and we try to define it in a way that is useful, that includes different overlapping technology themes that help people understand the different things in play. So it includes farmer platforms, it includes precision ag, but it also includes farm to consumer brands that some of you might be familiar with, like Licious and Fresh to Home, that are backward integrating into value chains. It includes agribusiness SaaS companies, and it includes innovative foods and the very nascent agri-biotech sector here. Next slide. If we aggregate all of the funding in the period from FY 2013-14 to the half-year mark, the story it tells is very interesting. The biggest winners from a funding perspective have been B2B agri-marketplaces and F2C brands, followed by farmer platforms and rural fintech. And then the deep tech category is below that, which is post-harvest technologies, precision agri, and agribusiness SaaS. And then the biotech category and innovative foods basically gets nothing. There's almost no deal flow, there's almost no funding. The two biggest categories for the purposes of having received venture dollars are B2B agri-marketplaces and F2C brands. And there's a reason for this. These are the themes that are the closest to the themes that generalist venture capital firms invest in and are comfortable with. So if you look after 2015-16, the VCs of India rediscovered B2B, right, in the wreckage that was the excesses of B2C in 2015 and 16. And so this is where you see the rise of players like Uran and Power to SME. And there have been essentially agri players that have benefited from that change of perspective. Most obviously NinjaCart, but also Waycool, Jumbo Tail, and some smaller players like Kamatan and Crow Farm. And these are essentially marketplaces where you procure from farmers, you sell to various players downstream, and you organize the middle. This has received a lot of attention. Farm to consumer brands, as I was referring to earlier, again, because of the predilection of venture capitalists for consumer themes, have also been big beneficiaries. So you see that in Licious and Fresh to Home, but also Country Delight, Vadam, Y-Cook, which is one of ours, where these are essentially FMCG brands or e-grocery brands, but that backward integrate all the way to the farm gate. And so this has also been a key theme. Getting a bit more agri-specific and a little further away from the comfort zone of generalist VCs, you have farmer platforms and rural fintech. So how do we define a farmer platform? How is it different from a B2B agri-marketplace? Essentially, a farmer platform thinks of its growth in terms of the farmers on the network, right? NinjaCart doesn't care if they buy from 10 million farmers or 1 million farmers producing 10 times as much. A farmer platform is looking at building out a base of farmers in which they provide a variety of services and add value in different ways. 4 big ways usually, right? Input supply, market linkage, financial inclusion, and advisory. And most farmer platforms are some mix of them, right? So Dehat in our portfolio does everything. If you look at AgroStar, it's mostly inputs and advisory. If you look at EM3, right, it's mostly mechanization and advisory. Gramophone, again, inputs and advisory. It's a different mix. And then you have some newer players like AquaConnect doing the same thing in aquaculture, and Clover. And rural fintech is essentially taking this fintech theme that has received an insane amount of funding in the last few years and applying it to our space. So the established startup here is Samonati, which has grown hugely. And some of the newer players in the space are Arya, Jai Kisan, which is doing CapEx lending, Gramcover, which is InsurTech, and Bijak, which is doing B2B trader finance. Next. There is less funding for deep tech, but that shouldn't be a surprise, because if we went to any sector in IoT, you would hear the same thing. Oh, VCs fund so many things, but they don't fund deep tech. Deep tech in general in India is a newer theme. And we've divided deep tech into 3 segments, right? Post-harvest technologies, agribusiness, SaaS, and precision agriculture. And in all of these segments, it's about the same amount of funding, but you are starting to see some larger players. You're starting to see, you know, in the dairy sector, Stellaps, which is very IoT heavy, players like EcoZen in micro cold storage. In agribusiness, SaaS, Cropin, and SkyMet have been the big winners, but you've got some new players like Procol. And in precision agriculture, players like Fussell in on-field sensors and Tartan Sense in agri-robotics. This is a more nascent space, but we're seeing a big pickup here the last 3 years. And finally, there is the glaring hole, the crying shame, the thing that deserves, honestly, private sector attention, public sector attention, and that we should be in a bit of a panic about. And that is life sciences. So I know this is an IoT conference, and I understand that no one here is very focused on life sciences for the most part. But this is where there is an inexplicable innovation gap. In all of my years of doing this, I have seen 3 good startups. We see almost no pipeline here. And it's not that they're great companies and they're not being funded. There's not even great companies being started. We need to look very hard at how we define life sciences, how we support life sciences. What you see, and I'm sure Dee will confirm this, is a lot of IP violation and Me Too crap. Right? Every agri-biotech startup says, I have 50 products. I don't want you to have 50 products, boss. I want you to have one product that is actually unique. Right? This is, right, and whether you're talking about seeds or biopesticides, it's almost always the same. There is nothing that is actually unique. There is nothing that is globally unique. And so that's something that needs to be fixed urgently. And I would say, if there are players that are more public sector minded, and I'm looking at you, Rajesh, and NAB Ventures, there is plenty of generalist VC capital for digital agriculture. There is nothing for this. And this is a space that needs to be addressed. Next slide. Thankfully, the ecosystem has developed hugely in the last few years. When we started this, it was almost impossible for these companies to get funded. Now you have Indigram Labs, you have CIIE, you have AIDEA from NARM, right? And newer players like Better Capital and Grow on the very early side of the equation. You have stalwarts like Omnivore, right? And Accel and Bloom and Nexus and Kalari and Charate and Ankur and O21. There's a lot of players now that write seed and Series A checks. And thankfully, even in the latter funding, which in 2016 was a big question, you have players like Lightstone Espada and Qualcomm and Bertelsmann and Tiger Global, which came into NinjaCart, and the Gates Foundation writing those larger checks. So the ecosystem has capital. It doesn't mean that you're not going to hear constantly, oh, I have this venture, it can't find funding. But I can tell you that in general, if it's a good venture, if it's a good team, if it's a good idea, it will find funding. And if it's not, there's probably a reason. Next slide. I've talked too much, but basically Omnivore is a venture capital firm based in India. We fund entrepreneurs building the future of agriculture and food systems, and I will leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My throat is a little bad, so you should pardon me for that. I would take a slightly different tack. I assume that most of you sitting in the audience have prowess in technology and want to look at agriculture. I think this assumption is correct, so welcome to agriculture. I want to tell few things which define agriculture in India. There used to be a professor in London School of Economics called John Madley. He once said in his writing, he made a very strong statement. Agriculture is not producing corn or rice or wheat or anything. It is a way of life. He also said something equally prophetic. When food is not available, people get excluded from their communities. So we're dealing with something which is as important, as prophetic as this. And there is a need for technology. I think all my speakers said there is a hell of a technology available. Why are we unable to connect? I think here, whatever little points, few points I'm going to make, I'm assuming the role of a GPS in case NABARD would be too happy to hold hands with anyone who would like to walk this. So I'm assuming the role of a GPS. So one more thing we should really understand is, all of us eat well in the last several years, but all of us also see in the papers that there is a huge amount of distress in the farming community. There is one simple reason. This could be an opportunity if you could really think. Farmers lost control on the agriculture they do. When the input companies are doing reasonably well, farmer isn't doing reasonably well at all. I think if you can really look at this, slice it, look at it carefully, you would have opportunities to really work and pick. Second, one more thing is, I think all of us, whosoever looks at agriculture, they would look at two things. Like there is something called as an 87-47 principle. I think 87% of the farmers are small. They cultivate 47% of the land, virtually half of the land. So whatever you do, need to look at that little guy who could really be a part of many things. Even the big farmer is not really big enough. So we should really look at that part much more carefully. And while we have produced enough, the efficiency levels are extremely low. There is something called as potential of a particular crop to produce X amount of what you call grains. While we could be the largest milk supplier, largest food and fruits and vegetables producers, the efficiency is abysmally low at all levels. So this could be an opportunity, this could be an area which really you need to really look at. Another area which the efficiency is very low is, we have a huge fragmented supply chain. I think whatever startups have come, they come in the logistics area, they come in this area, but there is something more to be done. Many of you would like to work with FPOs, some of you work with FPOs. And assuming that FPO would pay 3,000 or 4,000 every year for a fee or something like that, I think it's not still possible. We need to really look at that area also. If you really look at, like when so much of technology is available, why are we not able to crack this? I think I would really, if you allow me to say, agriculture and technology is like, while there is technology available, while there is something happening, if you want to really make it a large scale, it is something like the famous story of elephant and 4 blind men looking at elephant. Pardon me for saying this, agriculture need to be looked a little more carefully. You need to be on the ground to understand. Recently, two pass outs from ISI, PhDs in artificial intelligence and machine learning came to me, and they told me we would like to look at how do we rank farmers like Sibyl. Where do we get the data from? So I think all of you who are in this space, I think for you the data is like gasoline. there is no data available. I think you need to really look at how do you really create the data. So unless until the data is available, like, it's not like Uber cars, like where is data points are there. Agriculture still data, we need to really look at this aspect. As I said, like if you really look at, for example, someone said we can help you look at what could be the crop choice. I think at this point in time, there is technology available. What could be the moisture levels in the soil? There is technology available. Satellite data is available with no cost or with little cost. Can we not tell a farmer which crops need to be grown? What is the price available? What is the price which the farmers got across the markets in India is available? It's an open data. Can we look at the data? Can we look at the price data and whatever is happening on the soil? Can we not say which crop can be grown? I think some technology companies have done. I think every year farmers make a huge problem just because they choose wrong crops. Can you not look at this? This could be one area where you can really look at. And one more thing which we need to really look at is, what is the segment you want to be in? Unless until you define what is the segment you want to be in, you can't really go ahead. There is so much to be done. Only thing is you need to walk with someone who knows agriculture. That means you need to go sit with someone who understands that, and your technology prowess can be of immense use for the country. Only thing is you need to understand what that farmer anywhere in the country wants. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I think I will have a question to each one of the panelists, and then I will throw it open to a couple of questions, keeping in mind the time before me. So my first question goes to Varun. So Varun, you showed us some fancy photographs of tractors, etc., right? And you talked about targeted fertilizers. Do you think in a small holding environment like India, it is feasible? Or is it only valid for something which you bring from the West?
So that's can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So that's a very tough question to give a direct answer to. So let me just, I see three elements to this, right? The first element is, does the technology work? And I think there we can be comfortable that we will solve that problem even if we haven't solved that problem in the context of agriculture, because we've done it in other sectors. I think the second part of it is, are people ready to adopt these sort of technologies in the Indian context? And again, here, the example of infrastructure and construction that I spoke about, I think as long as we do this as a targeted program with some systemic interventions, change management, teaching, training people, it can be achieved as well. I think the last part of it on whether this makes economic sense for the Indian context is the hardest problem to solve, especially in the context of small land holdings, right? I don't think we will be able to sell tractors to individual farmers. I don't think that's going to work. Instead, we'll have to figure out other innovative business models where we can enable this to happen. So just as an example, financial institutions or people who provide crop insurance, they could mandate that farmers use this the way they've done this for driver's insurance, for instance, driver monitoring in exchange for lower premiums. So that's a way in which you reduce the upfront capital load for farmers to be to adopt these sort of technologies. The second option could be services providers, right? Rather than selling tractors, right? Allow tractor rentals with these technologies embedded, with the rates taking into account the productivity increases that you receive as a result of it. It's not an easy thing to solve, but we'll have to find innovative commercial ways.
Yeah, Dee.
No, I think if I can jump into that question and complement what you just said, We talked a lot about drones. That's an example that you talked about what's happening in China. 10% of Chinese crop applications is happening through drones. What does drones do? Safe application of chemicals, more targeted, and possibly much more optimal use of chemicals, and in fact, it improves productivity. The second piece is you also talked about fertilizer application. A lot of it is also government policy and the subsidy system, and how do you direct that to make use of the right fertilizer. And companies like NetFM, or I'm sure Jain Irrigation, through their irrigation and water management system, can also target the right nutritional and application of fertilizers as well. So is it possible? Absolutely. But that's where I think more and more as we think about it, when companies come together and collaborate, that's where we have these opportunities. Plus, we need government policies which support innovation. In all the conversation we talked about, I don't think any of us talked about the most important piece: how do you make Indian agriculture globally competitive? India has a huge opportunity to make it globally competitive, because 15, 20 years ago, Mark, you know about it, you were in Syngenta, Brazil, Argentina were struggling ag economies. Today they are the second and the third largest ag economies of the world. They got their act right, they got their policies right, and Argentina, more than 50% of their economy is driven by agriculture and hard currency exports. We can do it. Technologies exist, it's the willpower, it's people coming together and sound policies that can make a difference.
Since you jumped in, let me ask you a provocative question. So I talked about a problem of pesticides. So he's the provider of pesticides. So let me ask him a question. What plans does he have to make sure that the spraying is done within the MRLs which are there, and how to make our food export worthy?
Actually, I would raise a question. Why just export worthy? It should also be the same thing for domestic food as well. It has to be, that's the way you have to approach it. And save food, right? So that's table stake. In fact, Bayer globally made a commitment for sustainability exactly 3 months back, where we said we will work towards reducing chemical on the ground by 30% by 2030 with safer chemicals and more targeted usage. Now, coming specifically to the question that you said, that's where we have a food chain partnership where we will work with a lot of companies in the ecosystem. We end up certifying the level of residue that is there, which supports exports. We are supporting grape export, we have companies like you in your exports. But the question I have is, how do we drive this to make it much more of a certification, even for the domestic industry? And that's where I think for scaling up, we need innovative tools, because it is still largely manual and has a huge opportunity with IoT and education to make a big difference.
Thanks, Dee. But just data for the audience, when you buy chilies in India, I'm supposed to comply with 30 pesticides. When I export it to the US or Europe, there are 460 pesticides I comply with. So we may comply with our own norms, but our rules are such that the rules are very different from what they exist elsewhere in the world. Switching to Mark. Mark, tell us about something about IoT in your portfolio. You didn't elaborate too much.
Can I pull up those slides again? Is that possible? Humor me on this. Amazing. Skip forward, 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 forward. So I'm going to give you a few examples of sort of IoT platforms that have scaled dramatically. Probably the oldest, definitely the oldest company in our portfolio is Skymet. Most people know them as a weather forecasting platform. Actually, they're a much larger weather monitoring and IoT platform. Skymet has 7,000 weather stations across India. That is 3 or 4 times larger than the IMD. That is larger than the Air Force. That is larger than any private company. And it's spread across the entire country. And it's essentially live weather logging every 15 minutes, everywhere. And so that network, which was built in pieces and over time, has now gone fully national. And as that weather data set gets built, it's actually a higher degree of coverage than you even have in the US. Next. Another very successful IoT network that's been built in India is Stellapps. Stellapps is essentially a bunch of guys from Wipro, many of which many people here may know. who started this venture in 2011-12 with the goal of digitizing the dairy economy. So India is the largest milk producer in the world, but it's collected in the most hyper-fragmented manner possible with no traceability, no quality control except very far downstream. And Stellapse has essentially started digitizing collection center by collection center, this entire economy. They now have 30,000 digitized collection centers. I want to say India has about 2 lakh, so we're getting there. And now with the digitization of the collection centers, bringing financial inclusion and fintech to those farmers that are pouring, and even looking at providing quality, graded, absolutely traceable, secure milk on a B2B basis going forward.
Great, thanks, Mark. Anything more?
I got one more.
Okay, one more slide.
Sorry. Interesting example of made in India, though not largely used in India yet. We have a portfolio company called Eruvaka. Eruvaka makes the world's least expensive aquaculture IoT solution. And though it started in India, it found product market fit in Latin America. And right now, 90% of the sales of these units are to Ecuador, Peru, Nicaragua, Honduras. It's made right here in Vijayawada. And as shrimp farming has become more lucrative, now Indian farmers, and as the bill of materials through scale has come down, now Indian farmers are adopting, and I have one more thing and then I'm done. Thank you. And the last thing is EcoZen, and you all should be aware of this. This is based in Hinjewadi. This is a micro cold storage system on farm that also has embedded IoT that allows the farmer to pre-cool and cool at the farm gate itself, and is also building via IoT traceability into these perishable commodities. So IoT is a key theme for us. It's going to continue being a key theme for us. Something to be aware of. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. So we'll change the program thereafter, Arvind. After this, all people who want to make a pitch to Mark, he'll be available in the hall next door, okay? Okay, Surya, I think your people are spread all over. Now, whilst we address problems at a pan-India level, I believe that solutions have to start in small nucleuses and then they become centers of excellence and we multiply. Tell me, which part of India would you try and put your money on so that agriculture could become profitable, doubling income, everything? Which micro zone of India would you say is the ready for perhaps showcasing to the world that this is how agriculture has to be done?
It's very difficult to pinpoint a particular place like that. Say for example, he was talking about Eruvaka. Eruvaka came from that particular place after people had a huge problem with the way the shrimp farming was done. So they learned and then did that because they done it in an intense way. The whole problem is agriculture is not done in an intense way in most parts of the country. So wherever that intense spot is there, that could be the place where we could work. But one more important point which we should really look at is, for example, we're talking about traceability. Why traceability only when we export chilies to US? Like there is someone here, like he worked with an FPO. Like we said, okay, the mangoes which you get in Bangalore came from this particular place. Means there is a small mark, and then you can say where did this come from? People are still not demanding traceability. Like I always remember one fantastic example. Nick for me is a phenomenal example where it has demystified consuming eggs. NEC, National Egg Coordination Committee. So no one has done this job for agriculture. See, the point is there should also be a pull factor from the consumers. What is that I am eating? So like say for example, that slowly picking up in few places. Like in Bangalore, I would say has maximum number of organic shops. Whether they really sell organic or not is a different story. But Bangalore has a huge number of organic shops as compared to many cities. I'm not looking. I was living in Bombay till very recently. 1.5 years I'm here. Bombay, it's very difficult to find an organic shop. In Bangalore, every nook and corner there is a Bangalore organic shop. There is a demand here. Whether it's organic or not is a different story. So wherever wherever intensity happens, things are possible. And one more point which I would like to say is, as I said, let's see, we are sitting in a city which has got ISRO here, all of you are here who are technology experts. We are the most frugal nation with the reference to the technology. So only thing is we are not able to connect to the correct people. Say for example, how many states in the country have an incubation center? I had been to, in my 18 months here, I had been to all possible incubation centers in and around Bangalore. Nothing much to talk about. Many states don't even, whatever happened in Karnataka has not happened in the neighboring Andhra Pradesh, not happened in Kerala, not happened anywhere. Up of India, so it's not there. So we should also look at the incubation, the ecosystem of incubation. Who has to speak? Who has to do? That language is not known.
Right. Thanks, Surya. So just to come on to the organic bit, we deal with organic. A lot of people ask me, why is ITC not into organic? We just cannot produce the organic. And whatever you buy, we've checked it. You can rest assured 75% is not organic. I can show you test results because they're competitors. I don't show it. Most of it is wrong. So if you're buying organic stuff, God bless you. And if you pay for it. Okay. So I will now invite a couple of questions if there are any in the audience, or else I will then conclude or maybe ask one or two questions. Anyone? Anyone who wants to have any questions to anyone? Yeah, the gentleman there. Can a mic be taken there, please? The more provocative the question, the better it is. Yes, sir. Loud and clear, sir.
You talked about water as being one of the challenges.
Yeah.
Also, we have electricity being the way you pump up water and stuff like that, and it comes most of the time in rural areas in the night if it ever comes.
So which part of India are you talking of, sir?
Many parts of India. Worked in at least about 7 different states.
I think that problem is getting resolved, what I hear. I operate over 20 states and normally don't hear electricity as a problem. I don't, normally.
To pump up water at hot times, and that's a challenge for farmers. This is what I've been hearing, and I'm a farmer myself.
Sure, sir.
I know that. Maybe in a specific area, but I deal with that. Now, the point was not about whether electricity, I was thinking about there's plenty of sunlight and wind in many parts, and maybe not at the same time of the year. If there are through FPOs and collectives, some of these facilities, if they can be provided to the likes of NABARD and all that, it would be very useful. I'm myself a user of all of that and see the.
So he's looking for funding from you, sir.
No,
I'm
from me.
Yeah. But FPOs, he's saying solar pumps, etc., because in places where there's no electricity available, India being a tropical nation.
Solar pumps are widely available. There are 10 large manufacturers.
And 6 months in a year in this part, solar pump will not work because of the lack of light. I'm a solar user as well. Okay. I'm just saying, and I represent some FPOs in my area.
Sure, sir.
In trying to, advocate some of these things.
So which part are you from, sir, if you don't mind?
About Bangalore and south of Bangalore.
Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you very much. Any other question? There were some hands raised there. Yes, sir.
Major constraints in exporting activity. There's a lot of, for example, India has a very high productivity in fruits and vegetables, but not able to export. What are the major constraints in that?
Sir, export of which commodity?
All agricultural commodity, maybe anything. You're putting most of that. What is the constraints in that?
The major
How to resolve it? Otherwise, we cannot make farming profitable.
The major constraint is that you need to decide, from a policy perspective, that you want to do exports. It's very simple. Let's look at our cotton exports. Let's look at our sugar exports. Every time too much is exported, prices start going up, mills freak out, call the government bans exports. How can you build a global supply chain if every time you start exporting a lot, you stop exporting? Right? If you look at the most successful examples in India of agricultural exports, it's things that are not widely consumed domestically, right? Cara beef, buffalo meat. Off it goes. Prawns, high-end prawns, off it goes. No one cares. The entire industries are export-oriented, and India is globally competitive. We have to have a willingness to allow farmers to make money and not just support industrialists.
Yeah, and I think Mr. Dino Ryan had a very interesting statistic. He did a desk exercise. He calculated all the subsidies. He says if you were to withdraw the subsidies, we could pay each farmer 80,000 per year. So I'm saying I believe that MSP, etc., could perhaps at times impede our competitiveness in the world. They actually make us lazy.
No, we don't let price work. We subsidize inputs. We manage price of outputs. Farmer winds up over-consuming inputs, overproducing the wrong crops. Where's the market?
Yeah, yes, sir.
Yeah, how are these IoT products cost effective for ordinary farmers?
How are these IoT products cost effective? I think that's a valid issue that whoever works on this, there are several, someone talked about, irrigation, etc., using sensors. I am struggling for the last 5 years to even get drip irrigation done in some of the farms. It is a struggle. Farmer is not being able to make both ends meet, let alone make fresh investment. Those are issues. We don't have answers. So making IoT reasonable, low cost, right, is the only answer. And believe me, if we ask the farmer to pay for too many things, he doesn't have the money.
But that's a fair point. But the fundamental issue is companies like us, we work hard in solving yields so the farmer produces more, okay? Then you come financing. Now at the end of it, I still know that farmers lose money after a good crop because commodity prices have crashed. And they assume that this was a good crop to invest, and there's no risk management for the farmers. So it is, therefore, this is not something which is in isolation. The whole system needs to work together that's why I keep going back. The value chain as a concept across the multiple dimensions need to work together to focus on farmer profitability. And today, all of us are doing it in silos, and that's the transformation that we need to get to with policies, obviously.
Yes, Mark.
I'm also going to say something that is deeply unpopular. Adoption of agricultural technologies will be top-down. Okay? And let's have no illusions about this. When Xiaomi introduced their phones in India, they didn't start selling them in Dharavi. When Whirlpool introduced washer dryer, they didn't start selling them in Bastar. It's going to be adopted by those 13% of farmers that own half the land first. And as economies of scale bring down the cost of production, you will see it go to that next 20% and that next 20%. But let's not have illusions here about how any kind of technology gets adopted. Every technology adoption curve in the world starts here and goes down as price goes down.
Thanks, Mark. Last remarks from you, Varun.
Yeah, if I can add one more point, I don't think we need to go to the most sophisticated technology first, right? You don't need autonomous tractors to start with. Putting a GPS sensor on a tractor is +1,000 rupee type affair. So that isn't fundamentally unaffordable, and you can build solutions around it which allow farmers to be a lot more productive.
Thanks. I've got 2 minutes to go. I will try and give some concluding remarks. Yes, sir.
Can I ask one last question, please?
I heard a reference to Brazil and Argentina. Aren't we contending with rapid deforestation as a result of becoming over-competitive? Shouldn't India not fall into that trap? We're already somewhat in the trap, losing so many football fields every hour, right? That's the whole metric. I heard.
No, that's a valid question. But at the same time, sound policies can balance both, right? It doesn't mean that you go to the extreme of what's happening there, but at the same time, with what we have and with the learnings, you can have sensible policies that drive agriculture to be profitable and sustainable.
Mark, last remarks.
Make India self-secure, food secure in edible oils, and we can fight deforestation in the rest of the world. Actual deforestation in India related to agriculture is almost negligible.
Sanjeev, can I ask one question here on your right?
On my right.
Standing here, 6 feet.
Yeah.
Near the lights. So
There, yeah. You are obvious.
Can
Yeah,
I
tell
ask
me.
some quick questions?
Sure. Please, last question, please.
Hi, I'm Digvijay. I'm from a social organization called the Art of Living. We have a deep connect to the grassroots as well as the cities. So to percolate any technologies, we have a great organization, but often we don't have the connect with the technology partners to really enable our scale to bring about impact. So we end up teaching things which are limited in their impact. So if there are opportunities or ways in which people, organizations where they have a grassroots reach can partner with the technology.
Can I respond to that? As I speak, I'm tying up with Vikram Dish, and we're going to have about 100 to 200 villages working with Art of Living, using your training modules in our concept. So we are working with you, and I believe you have a terrific ground level organization. I think rural India will use it. Yes, I think we are taking you on as a partner. Thank you very much. Okay. Because we all have flights, so this is the last question. Whoever asked the last question will now have to pay us some money for the next flight.
Yeah.
Short answer.
Short answer. 2-3 things. One is consumption patterns are changing. More people are moving to urban areas and their affordabilities are higher. Second, people are taking in more protein-rich diets, etc. So again, consumption patterns are changing. And there's a baseline population growth that continues to exist in India.
So brilliant. So I have a job to conclude everything that everyone has said. I won't be able to. So let's go. So what did D have to say? He's called D Narayan, right? He talked about IoT. He talked about Bear conceptualizing better life farming, and future is value chain. That's what D keeps talking about. Take the entire value chain into account. That is what D talks about, right? So that is something which we need to work. He is collaborating with NetFM, Yara Fertilizers, and he is hoping to bring us also onto the same platform. Good. Thank you very much. Let's move to the next one. Mark has a lot to say, so they are fortunately short points, but I think we must hats off to an individual like him who's invested in India, who stays in India, who's an American and a Canadian. Very few Indians does what he does, so hats off to you. So I think his biggest point which had an impact on me is less funding in deep tech, post-harvest, agribusiness SaaS, and there is a huge gap in life sciences and agri-biotech. That's the key take for me as far as Mark is concerned, and the fact that his portfolio is large enough. So he's available after this for any investments. Next. So Varun obviously brings in a lot of expertise from McKinsey's learning. So he's talking about increasing food demand. He's talking about changing patterns. You may cater for today's requirement, but he's saying cater for tomorrow's requirement. Consumption patterns are changing. That is the key thing. He talked about autonomous drones, etc. Obviously, applicability to smallholder is important. And let's go to Surya, what he had to say. He says country produces enough, but the productivity levels are very low, right? So productivity, we all know, is very low. Farmer centricity is important. I talked about it. Keep the center, keep the farmer at the nucleus of everything. Data available, will be shocked. All the data which is available even at the center, you just can't make head and tail. If you want to do big data analytics on the data from the center, there has to be a huge work that is done in getting the data together. At an overall level, very, very difficult for me to summarize, but these are the 4 key points. I'll start. Scaling in Indian agriculture is possible with collaborations. We cannot work alone. That's one thing. I was competing with Bayer that I will do the initiative. We realize we can't do it alone. This is a day and age of collaboration. So we're bringing people onto our platforms. He's doing it, we are doing it. Food chain partnership. So this is a point which is export oriented. Unless India becomes export oriented, we are not going to be successful. We're going to live perpetually in this age of getting subsidies. All of us fight for subsidies and getting MSPs. We are not going to be competitive. Then labor shortage. very, very critical. If some of you work in the rural areas, you'll find labor is not available for harvesting. Labor is taking money and running away. Prices are shooting up. Farmers are giving advances and not getting the labor on the field. There is a big need for people to disrupt this entire thing. We in ITC are working on it, on a product so that we can aggregate labor. A rural clap like an urban clap. I'm working on that area right now. Funding, as he said, is not an issue, folks. So if anyone has a great idea, please come to Mark. He will guide you, right? Thank you very much. Thanks for being a wonderful audience. Thank you, panel members.
1 minute. Just stay there. So thanks a lot. This was a long, engaging discussion. You guys have a lot of questions. They have a flight to catch, so I don't want to be the culprit. And I learned a lot. There is one observation I want to make. Mark put out the deep tech not being invested. 2016, I spent 3 months trying to convince the NASSCOM IoT COE because the government, the union government was very busy. They do something on agriculture. And the easy fruit is the e-business and all that. And I was telling them that is a marketplace activity. You don't have to do much. It will get done. We have to invest deep tech. Of course, I'm not a good communicator. Never happened. Nipun, if you're there, please listen to me. Anyway, thanks for that. I'll invite Anand, sir, who is the chief editor for IoT for India, to give for Sanjay.